In this video, we will look at dividing a whole number by a decimal number using repeated subtraction. The focus of this standard is using models, drawings, and strategies based on place value to compute problems. The work shown here should come after students have worked with more concrete models to divide, such as base 10 pieces, a base 10 shorthand drawing, or even base 10 grids. Let's take a look at 3 divided by 25 hundredths. Before we begin to solve, it's helpful to think about a reasonable solution. When we think about this, we know that 25 hundredths is less than 1 whole. And if we were to divide 3 by 1 whole, we would get 3. There would be 3 groups of 1 whole in 3 wholes. Since 25 hundredths is less than 1 whole, we could reason that we will be able to get much more than 3 groups of 25 hundredths out of the 3 wholes, because that is a much smaller amount. We're making groups of a smaller amount, 25 hundredths, than we would be if we were dividing by 1 whole. So we could reason that our answer will be greater than 3. So to divide using repeated subtraction, we will be able to just use our number sense, or based on place value here. So we could first think we would just be able to do 3, and we're going to subtract one group of 25 hundredths. So 3 minus 25 hundredths. And in this case, students could think about their knowledge of quarters and use that to help them. We know that if we were to take 1 quarter away from $3, we would be left with $2.75, or 2 wholes and 3 quarters. Now we know we just need to keep subtracting groups of 25 hundredths to be able to find the quotient here. So now I'm going to write 2 and 75 hundredths, and then we'll subtract 25 hundredths again. I know if we just took another quarter away, we would be at $2.50, or 2 and 50 hundredths. We'll keep going. We're just going to repeatedly subtract 25 hundredths to help us figure out how many groups of 25 hundredths make up 3 wholes. So $2.50, or 2 and 50 hundredths, minus 25 hundredths would be 2 and 25 hundredths. We can keep going here. 2 and 25 hundredths minus 25 hundredths would be 2. So now we could say, well, 2 minus 25 hundredths. It's kind of like where we started with 3 minus 25 hundredths. We know that takes us down to 1 and 75 hundredths. So now we come over here, 1 and 75 hundredths minus 25 hundredths would be 1 and 50 hundredths. Then 1 and 50 hundredths minus 25 hundredths would be 1 and 25 hundredths. 1 and 25 hundredths minus 25 hundredths would be 1 whole. Again, I'm just repeatedly subtracting 25 hundredths so I can figure out how many groups of 25 hundredths there are in 3 wholes. So now we'll say 1 minus 25 hundredths. You know, if we had $1 and we took away a quarter, we would be left with 3 quarters, or 75 cents, which is 75 hundredths. Now we have 75 hundredths minus 25 hundredths, which would be 50 hundredths. Now we'd have 50 hundredths minus 25 hundredths, which would be 25 hundredths. Now we need a little more space here. And now I know I'll take 25 hundredths, and subtract 25 hundredths, and we would be at 0. So now in order to find the quotient, we need to look back and see, well, how many groups of 25 hundredths did we have to subtract to get all the way from 3 to 0? And that will tell us our quotient. So we'll just go back and check now. We have 25 hundredths once. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So that means we have 12 groups of 25 hundredths there. So that means 3 divided by 25 hundredths would be 12. And we know that that answer is reasonable. Before we solved, we said we knew that the answer would be greater than 3. Since 25 hundredths is so much less than one whole, we are just finding a group, how many groups of a pretty small amount there are in 3 wholes. So 12 groups is very reasonable. And again, this is how we could divide a whole number by a decimal number using repeated subtraction.